Yeah. What's up? What's happening? We are live on podcast, man. Podcast. Talk about Black culture, talk about it positively, talk about, anything and everything. Not anything and everything, but things that are important. You feel me?
Yeah.
And we are blessed in the building, man, to have Dr. Hand back, man. And Dr. Hand was going off in the in the green room back there, man. So I'm like, man, let's go ahead and start this jump, man, because Dr. Hand was going off, man. But go ahead, Doc. You were talking about how we're the title of this podcast is Culture of Ignorance. You know what I'm saying? This is based on a lot of things that's happening in Florida, with talking about somehow slavery was beneficial to Black people. You know what I mean? But also, I think in the greater scheme of things, it is about about America. It's what's happening in Florida speaks volumes to America and Americans. You know what I'm saying? And one of those things you were talking about, the argument's not the individual. You know what I'm saying? And we were talking about the white supremacy. I might add a comment here. My belief is that white supremacy has evolved, and one of those evolutions is adding Black faces to white supremacy, because we see that the task force for the decisions that happen in Florida with the education is 5 Black people. One of which said that she was glad about slavery because she didn't want to be worshiping trees.
See, and this type of ignorance is so close to power. And Baldwin said it the best, man. Ignorance allied with power is the most dangerous threat you can have.
Yeah,
and I just see the ignorance is, I don't even know. It's like, it's the kind that's like, it's almost like, man, this is the best we got. Ignorance. Like, can we do better? Like, can we do better? Because, whether or not you believe slavery was beneficial to Black people or not is not the point. It's a moot. That's subjective. Because I would say that yes, if slavery was beneficial to the people who were getting free labor. Okay, so let's be clear. It was beneficial to the people who were receiving free labor. It was not beneficial to the ones who were giving the free labor. Now, the reason that they make these arguments is very simple. They make these arguments because it's the only way that they can reconcile that their ancestors were not the most evil people who ever walked the earth. Because if we were to believe everything that they did to us here, that we would be hard to find a historical parallel of more evil done to any people in humanity. I mean, even going back to antiquity, like as far as back as you want to go, like I mean, I know they made some, and I would tell people, what makes it so challenging is the enduring legacy is part of the things we're trying to wrestle with. Because see, I believe that the descendants of the people who were enslaved in America should not be told what they can or cannot learn about their history by the descendants of the people who enslaved them and their emissaries. Because if they're not going to teach you a history that makes it uncomfortable to talk about why granddad was a Confederate. Or great granddad was a Confederate, and we got this monument down here because he wasn't fighting to own people. He was fighting for states' rights. He was fighting for his Southern way of life, but his Southern way of life and his states' rights were to own you like a cow. And see, we've never reconciled that position in this country. Now, let me refrain. We have not reconciled it outside of the Black community
Mm-hmm.
because internally we know what we know. The ones who are knowledgeable know because we understood that they have wanted to withhold knowledge from us from the day we got here.
Yeah.
And nothing has changed from that fundamental premise because every generation of white people in this country have to negotiate with themselves, what do we want Black people to learn here?
Right.
It's a generational negotiation, and it's intergenerational because no one has to train them. It's not because knowledge makes them uncomfortable. It's like, no, because knowledge would change the social order. That's what it is. Knowledge
Exactly.
will change the social order. And if I want the social order to be in place, then I need, first off, I need Black people operating like they've always operated before, not coming to a consensus on anything. Like, there are things that we generally have a consensus about here that are very rare when you start to talk about it. It's like we will think that if you ask 10 Black people, how many of you all think that slavery is beneficial here? You might get 2 out of the 10. So I'm saying 80% are probably going to say it wasn't beneficial because nothing was done to address the traumas. And I heard DeSantis the other day talking about, well, they could have been blacksmiths. And I said, well, listen, yeah, it would be beneficial if they were retaining their wages.
Exactly.
But if you don't give me my wages, how can I benefit from it? And saying you give me food and clothing and shelter, I think of it is an insult because it would have been a human right to not do it. But everything that we've created or gotten here, there has been a financial incentive tied to it for us. Like, you did not want your enslaved person to starve to death because that would have not been a good investment if they died.
Right.
So you wanted to keep them alive, but it wasn't for their benefit. The longer they lived and worked was for your benefit. And so when you start to talk about why a lot of people, and this is where there is really no agreement among the planter class or the enslavers, there was really no agreement among them, especially when it became territorial. There was no agreement about how the institution was best run. And I think that there's a misunderstanding about that slavery was just this one system that operated and autonomous of everything else. Like, no, it was learned behavior.
Yeah. And I think you touched on a good point. And that's one of those things that I've have learned. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you read, I've skimmed through the Peculiar Institution and read other books. It's how we teach slavery. I think that we teach that there was a group of people and they were oppressed, right? We don't teach about the extraction of wealth. We don't teach about the, the exploit. We kind of teach about the exploitation, but we don't teach about the rape, right? You know what I'm saying? I remember telling somebody, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, man, the reason why your auntie and uncle is light skinned, man, is, it's because of rape and slavery, right? In 1808, we don't teach about how in 1808, America actually banned the importation of slavery, but they banned in the importation of slavery because they already had a slave trade going in America. Part of that slave trade that was happening in America was that there was a class, another group of people who they called colored, you know what I mean? Or we call them mulattoes, you know what I mean? We don't call them mulattoes. But that's what, you know what I'm saying? So it's how we teach slavery. We don't teach about, about how we don't teach the structures of slavery. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And we can't teach that America abolished slavery.
Right.
We know
Oh,
it did
yeah.
not.
That's
Slavery
true.
is not
That's true.
abolished here. So what year did America abolish slavery? 2023 and counting. We have
That's
not
true.
abolished it. We just redesignated it, and we co-signed it to people who were as it was initially meant for. But one of the things I say to you is this: when you talk about curriculum, you know, there was a larger problem in this country around the 19th century. It's
Hmm.
what shall we teach any kid anything? You know, public education hasn't been around as long as people think it has been.
Right. Hmm.
Public education is a very new phenomenon in American history. And so when you start to talk about what are we going to teach white kids? What are we going to teach black kids? Well, you don't sit down with the goal in mind to say, what am I going to teach any child? You sit them down with the goal to say, what do I need?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I
Yeah.
think that's what you're seeing happening in this country. You're seeing a division, an ideological division that has always been here that's never been addressed. It's like the elephant in the room. We,
Hmm.
we've understood that this idea that even the Northerners, although they were not in favor of the institution of slavery, was not in favor of black people having equality with them.
Exactly.
When you realize that, you know, Jim Crow started up north before it
Yeah.
came down south, because down south they didn't need Jim Crow; they just had slavery.
Yeah.
Up north, you couldn't ride a bus up north if you was black. It was segregated up north first.
Hmm. Hmm.
The South was segregated for different reasons, and I think we don't deal with that phenomenon about how, because the Northern sentiment in the 1860 election, it was the Democrats the Democrats are the only ones who had a national platform or national party in the country. But they had so many different diffractions. You know, you had the wing of the Douglas and Davis, and you had all
Yeah.
these divisions. And so when you start to look at the way the political power was conceptualized over the issue of how slavery will be taught, even going back to what Lincoln said. He said, listen, I'm in favor of the white man being the superior race. You know, he said that. He said, look, if you know, I'm not abolitionist in the sense of equality, because I like, just because I don't support prohibition, if you have a problem with me drinking alcohol, that's your issue.
Yeah.
And I think what we've learned is how we learn, and
Hmm.
how our system is able to be kept in place without any, like we see glaring problems with our system, but how is this system allowed to stay in place despite having all these glaring issues? And
Mm.
ignorance is one part of it, but social learning, and this is what I've been trying to focus on, is that we're socially programmed to respond to situations that may differ from our personal beliefs. So for example, I know that if I'm in public, if somebody's walking right behind me, it's polite to hold the door a second or two, right?
Hmm.
That's a social thing that I've learned over my time. Does everybody do it? No. Do you have to do it? No. Is it socially acceptable to do it? Yes.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to racism in America, there was a time when it was okay to be overtly racist, call you N-word, kick you. Well, that is no longer socially acceptable anymore.
Right. Exactly.
No, the Karen, they got videotapes, and now, like, no, who wants to be the next, you know, star
Hmm.
on YouTube, because they don't know how to behave themselves socially.
Hmm.
And what you're seeing happening is a society that never trained or prepared its citizenry to integrate or interact socially on the massive scale. There is no teaching for that. There is no education or instructions for that, because I've always been able to include or exclude Black people as needed for my purposes.
Hmm.
So when 2 to 5% of Black people move into an area, okay, we're going to move that area. We have already got predetermined numbers of acceptable numbers before we have designated this as an area that's less desirable. But
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
but that being beside the case, I think that your points are valid because what we're seeing happening is a argument that has never been finished is still going on. You know,
Yeah.
it's like that
Mhm.
Korean, like the Korean
Yeah.
War armistice. Like the
Mhm.
Korean War never ended. They just
It
stopped.
never ended.
They just stopped shooting
Yeah.
at each other. And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I think that that's where when I think of race relations in America, I think of this issue is that we've just not been shooting at each other,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, yeah. Just
the resentment is there. The
yeah.
the the
Mhm.
what I say, the people who it's in their interest for us not to come to a common ground is I think that the gatekeepers are the ones that are really standing in the way for a lot of progressful things because I'm not concerned about when it comes to Florida as a state because
Mhm.
I know they're just a bellwether.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's like Florida is having a national discussion for America.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just happening in Florida, but the same discussion is happening in Ohio. Same
Right.
discussion happening out north. We're
Yes.
having the same
South
discussion,
Carolina.
South Carolina, and the reason
Yeah.
we're having these discussions is because we understand that we're only one generation away from
Mhm.
revolution.
Yeah.
Every society, you're one generation away, and I think that leaving wealth inequality off the table, leaving social justice off the table, the rallying cry that I think is happening today is this idea of what rights will you give away uh because you are afraid that those rights can be used against you in a negative way.
Right. 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 Right.
Because if you were to go back to the 60s and say, do you think white Americans would have allowed the police to walk up on them because they were suspicious and pat them down for no reason? Do you think white Americans would have allowed themselves that to happen to them?
No.
No, they wouldn't have.
Mm.
They would have not. This is the tyranny die people, right? This is
Mhm.
the tyrannical whatever. But you see that when they did the Terry v. Ohio, when they changed that law, the white folks were not affected by that change. So
Mhm.
they gave up that power for themselves
Mhm.
because the fear was, how will we now what are we going to now deal with socially these individuals who we've been taught the worst of in our society? And we're still grappling with that question today.
Yeah, absolutely, man. One of those things that I've been thinking about, Doc, is that um how the civil rights movement, right? We look at it as the civil rights movement was black people trying to become citizens of America, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily as we should have been looking at it. We should look at it as black people trying to gain or make America give to us what they promised, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
now we're in a moment to where we're in a new civil rights era, right? To
Yeah.
where we are, from about 1878 or something to 1968 or so, 1970, society was weaponized against black people, right?
Yeah.
Because well, what people don't understand is that although there were Jim Crow laws, a lot of states didn't have Jim Crow laws. They
I
just
didn't need them.
they didn't need them. They just needed society to just put a
Yeah.
sign up in the window, say no black people or something like that,
Yep.
right? But now we're in an era to where the same opposition to black people is now weaponizing the government against black people.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And you know what I'm saying? And society is still weaponized against black people. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. And we've had no allies. I think that's a
Sure.
misconception. I
Yeah.
think I think that to say that we're we're in this we're in this by ourselves, I
Mhm.
think is it's interesting because we're coming up to a lot of opposition of forces that most people are not prepared socially to deal with.
Mm.
We're
Mhm.
because if I'm an American, if the American government sends me to Iraq or to Saudi or to a Middle Eastern country to fight, then they are obligated to give me some information about that location where I'm going to.
Right.
They don't just put me in there with a blindfold on and say, hey, go here and execute.
Mhm.
So they have a responsibility to familiarize me with the culture, with some taboo things, with some language things. Hell, they even had to, provide me with some fluency, because if I don't have those things, I'm going to be a liability.
Mhm.
But when it comes to America, the government does a very poor job of preparing Black people for the individual racism that's not collective here.
Right.
Because all I see is an individual. He was a one dude. Like these dudes aren't lone wolves.
They aren't lone wolves,
They
man.
are identity. They are identity
Mhm.
white identity terrorists. They are who suppose a belief that
Mhm.
whites are superior to everybody else, and that
Mhm.
they have to take this country by force
Mhm.
and so this is
Oh,
what they
I don't mean to interrupt you, Doc, but it's like January 6th. People are like, "Oh, it's just a few individuals." No, there are no lone wolves, man. You are not paying attention to the people who didn't go. You're not paying attention to the people who are on social media. You're not paying attention
yeah.
to who like that and support it. But yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Doc. I'm sorry.
But when you go down that line, what you're finding out is not only are we unprepared, because I think that that's part of it, is the people who were supposed to prepare you were not prepared.
Yeah.
The
Mhm.
people who were supposed to prepare you were not prepared. And I
Mhm.
think that when you start to look at what we're up against, a lot of the challenges are individual challenges to get to a collective conscious. Because
Mhm.
I don't necessarily need to, like I said, be in lockstep with everything somebody thinks, says, or does. But we have to understand that the opposition is organized.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
we talk about Moms for Liberty. I said, listen, don't you understand that this is the same mentality with them citizen councils, and every
The
time,
orders of the Confederacy. It's the
yeah,
same mentality.
it's the
Yeah,
same.
man.
And not only is it the same mentality, they haven't learned anything.
Mm.
It's like the same arguments that people made for integrating the military in the 40s, where
Mm.
it's like, it's going to destroy us, our ability to fight. It's going to, and I'm like, bruh, the best thing y'all ever did was let us fight in your services.
Yeah,
Best thing y'all ever did.
that's
But
true though.
more importantly, it's what do I have when the fear argument no longer works?
Right.
What did I develop while I was making the people afraid?
Mhm.
What did I develop to perpetuate this view? Because when the people aren't afraid anymore, and I haven't prepared myself for a time when they're not afraid, then I'm not going to be prepared to respond to them not accepting my narrative anymore.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
hook, line, and sinker. I don't just believe this. And I think that's where we're to a point where the individual is we're not wasting time or energy trying to debate a black dude and a white dude in blackface, or vice versa.
Mhm.
We
Or
ain't got
vice versa,
time.
right? Or vice
Because
versa, right?
yeah, because
Yeah.
we just because the thing is this, is that if your arguments were valid, then the scrutiny that they would get would be different.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
scrutiny isn't different because we was talking to the guy about the healthcare thing, and I said, listen, I said insurance is not healthcare.
Right.
I
Exactly.
can have insurance, but if this hospital is not accustomed to seeing a black patient, and I'm in this hospital with people who have bigoted and biases because that's what they were taught academically,
Academically, right? Like
they were
that
taught.
is what it
Now,
is.
and this is the thing: what has been done to address or even ameliorate some of the harm that was done from this academic bigotry?
Mhm.
You know,
Oh,
what
hold on,
has
I
really
I just wanna add this in, and just so folks understand is that the reason when the opioid crisis happened, Black people were not victims to the opioid crisis was because there is a belief in the medical community that Black people have higher pain tolerances. So Black people were not offered opioids. We were offered Tylenol or Motrin or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to add context to that. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, and that's where I think when we start to talk about medical apartheid, the things that have been done in this country, the experimentations and the things that were not even, you know, before you needed ethical approval, you know, the conditions that we find ourselves in um are challenging because we don't speak with, like, so the Florida chapter or the Florida charter of such and
Mhm.
such organization says, you know, this is not the right direction that we want to go in,
Mhm.
because we know where this road leads. We know where it ends. And
Mhm.
this road ends in the question not being designed around white comfort anymore.
Right. Exactly.
Like the like what we learn about ourselves can make you uncomfortable, and that's not our responsibility.
Right.
Like, I'm not responsible for your being uncomfortable.
Right.
However, I am responsible for making sure that I am educated and aware of the threats that are facing me and my family. Like,
Yeah.
that's responsibility. And I don't think I don't think that people look at this strategically, in the sense that it's not going to take thousands of armed white people in this country to cause a race war or panic. That's not what it'll cause. What they're waiting for is our response.
Yep.
Our the kindling has already been kindled. All they're waiting for is us to say, when is enough enough?
Right. 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 Right.
Because the moment that we say that, now you're going to see them citizen councils come back out again. Now you're going to see the land protectors protect the personal property protector come up, and
Yeah. Yeah.
all these groups pop up, because once you've had enough, then the question then becomes is, hey, you know, you've been invited to a conversation that you should
Mhm.
never be invited to.
Yeah.
Like
That's
you, yeah,
Yeah,
like
no, no, no. So that's what I was going to touch on because I think it becomes the one of those things to where, as Black people, like I've been reading about Denmark. I've been reading Denmark Vesey, right?
yeah,
You know what I'm saying about Denmark Vesey. And one of those things Denmark Vesey was said, like, and I tell people, and I try to say, whenever I can, what I'm saying, especially on social media, everybody can't go, man. Everybody can't go.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, you know what I'm saying? We spend way too much time trying to get everybody to go. You know what I'm saying? And
Because we never developed a criteria for who. We never developed the criteria for who could come.
who can go? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
We never
exactly.
had a criteria,
Exactly, man.
because we just say, hey, well, if you Black, you can come. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, hold up.
Like, hold up. Like when Candace Owens came on scene, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, yeah, nah, I can't do this. And there were so many Black people like, well, like, let's hear her out.
Uh,
Let's hear her out. Let's see what she got to say.
and
Like, hey,
and
hey, hey.
hey,
No, no,
and and
do it.
being an open-minded individual.
Oh
Well,
man.
I am an optimist, because
Mhm.
no matter, because and the real truth is, no matter what Candace Owens says or does or will say or do, she will always be invited back into the Black community if
Man,
she
always,
repents.
man.
But
Always,
but you know what though, and that's fine.
always, man. I'm just like, she ain't coming to my barbecue. I'll tell you that.
Well, but that's the
Hey, get
thing,
your ass out of here.
and I think this, man. I think that we live in a market-based economy, right?
Mhm.
And in a market-based economy, if the market has a demand or a need for something, someone will fill it in.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Same way, in the white supremacist culture, there is a demand for soulless Black people who will toe the party line in order to get some extra victuals.
Yeah.
And so we know that going in, we know that up front. And I was talking to the guys on there, and I said, "Listen, man," I said, if I brainwashed you good enough, you don't know you were brainwashed. If I brainwashed you good enough, you don't know you're brainwashed.
It's true.
And I think that the brainwashing isn't as good as it used to be. Like the brainwashing used to be like tremendous. It would just be like, look, it would be like the best stuff you ever seen in the world. And now it's like, nah, bro, I ain't convinced. Like your arguments aren't convincing me anymore.
They aren't convincing no more, man. Yeah, man.
Because what I like to do is I like to say, listen, man, there are indicators that someone doesn't have a good argument. And usually that indicator is let me just change the subject.
Exactly. Move the goalposts, right?
Move the goalposts.
Move
the goalposts. Or let me create a scenario that don't exist and then argue that hypothetical as if it's real. Let's be rational. Let's be reasonable. Let's be logical. Let's if what I am saying is not valid, then refute me by answering the question. Because I don't think we do that.
No.
It ain't enough just for me to tell you your idea is bad. I need to tell you why it's bad.
But Doc, I think because we live in a debate culture, everybody wants debate, right? Everybody wants debate rather than have gnosis, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I don't like, you know what I'm saying? Like, approaching a conversation because I want to give you knowledge or we exchange knowledge, right? We exchange, because it reminds me when Martin Luther King was marching with Kwame Ture, right? Stokely Carmichael at the time, right? Martin Luther King was marching with Kwame Ture,
Mississippi.
Yeah, in Mississippi, right? That was when I can't remember the individual. He had got shot. They go there, yeah, and then Stokely Carmichael. This is when Black Power.
Black Power,
Black Power, right? But out of that, right, Martin and Stokely kind of gain an understanding from each other because they exchange gnosis, right? Stokely Carmichael is coming from real revolution. He's coming from communist, kind of Marxist, you know what I mean, ideology about economics.
Dismantling.
Yeah, dismantle the system, right? Dismantle the system, build it up, centering people, right? And Martin Luther King is coming from it, from an assimilationist mindset at that time, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But through that interaction, they both understood, and you can hear the message. If you ever hear Stokely or read anything from Stokely, you know what I mean, you can kind of hear and see, you can hear Martin Luther King coming through. But again, today we don't live in those. Today, everybody wants to debate everything rather than having gnosis, knowledge.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is this: it's where does your mental premise start from? This is what I've been learning to do: is that my mental premise has to start before your argument. It has to start before your argument. If my mental premise starts before your argument, meaning your argument has to now take into consideration things that it wasn't built to do. Like your argument wasn't built to do what you're trying to make it do. You're trying to make your argument do more, and I'm like, no, this isn't a good strategy, because what I've seen happening is, where does your premise start from? So I start from a premise that 1619, first Africans arrived. 1776, America declares independence from Great Britain. Right? Two separate dates, both true. But my premise is, which one are we talking about? Because I think so often there's a conflation of things that don't need to be conflated. Primarily, like, what the Negro question or the Negro problem.
The Negro problem. Yeah, yeah.
How
Question of the Negro problem.
Yeah, and this is what Florida is. Florida is just an extension of that essential question, the Negro problem. What is the Negro? What are we going to do with all of these free black people in America? What are we going to do with them? We can't ship them back to Africa; it's too expensive, and we can't give them social integration because we've been taught they're animals,
right?
And they're going to rape our daughters.
They're thugs.
The thugs, and they're criminal, and so now we are trying to reconcile the magnitude of this harm, and not even saying, hey, regardless of where you're starting at, the argument is acknowledge that. Like whether or not you agree with it isn't the point. Acknowledge it. And once you acknowledge it, then it allows you to change the earlier of your premise. Because I think the way we start the question is we think of solutions as individualistic first. Like right. This is going to solve your problem. It may not solve his problem, but it'll solve your problem. And you'll be more interested in the solution if it solves your problem first. Now, it just so happens that your problem is the same problem that the other 40 million you got. Okay. Okay. So now we have to understand that we're coming across some non-negotiables, because during any debate or any argument, there comes a time when concession is required. It's when I have to concede something in order to get something. And I think most people don't understand that I have to concede in order to get. Because if I start off from the premise that I know the answer first, then it's going to bias me to anything that you say to me. Because one of the things that I like to do is I like to synthesize thought. Because if I'm synthesizing it, then I can take the ebbs away, take the flows away, and keep it consistent. You know, I was reading The Talented 10th the other day, you know, and as I was reading it, you know, there was something that Du Bois said that really caught me about the question of education in the Negro. You know, before Carter G. Woodson, he made some comments that were never brought up into the consideration. Like during integration, no one ever brought up the idea of what history are we going to teach these integrated schools? Right. Yeah. We wasn't concerned about the curriculum because we were trying to get in. We used all the social capital to get through the door. And then once we got in the building, everybody was tired. Yeah. The lawyers were tired from lawsuits. The people were tired from busing. Everybody was tired. Everybody's tired. Everybody's tired.
That's what happened in the 80s, right? Everybody's tired, man. By the time the 80s hit, folks tired, man. They're like, look, man.
Hey, they got some government jobs. Yeah. Getting pensions. And they was like,
and they said mortgage. Look, man.
Yeah, and then a few of them got to go into, you know, a place that ends in Oaks or Woods. You know, what up, Ashbury, Dale, something, you know.
Woodbridge.
Woodbridge, yeah, exactly. One of those places with a good ending. Yeah. But to your point, I say this. I'd say that Black people, leaders specifically, or those who desire to do this, I think it's okay to debate with people. I think you can argue. I think that's healthy. I think what's unhealthy is approaching any solution as if there's a panacea for it. Like there's just, we just flip on that light switch. No problem is like that. But where does the solution start? And I am of the firm belief that the solution should start with the originator of the problem. Like the originator of the problem should be more vested in the solution. Unfortunately, in this country, they don't see any problems that were created or effects of what they created.
Yeah.
They just see individuals who either are got ghetto mentalities
Mm.
or they climbed out of the ghetto and now
Mhm.
you are the exceptional Negro. Now you not like the other black folks. You speak well. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, and he's well
You
read, and I'm
yeah,
like,
you drive a nice car. You live in a nice house. You know what I'm saying?
and this ostentatious part
Yeah.
is important for us because most people aren't going to listen to somebody who does not possess more than they have.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
as a rule of thumb, like you can't tell me about investing in the stock market if you ain't got no stock market money.
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
I'm going to look to your asset, what you're saying, and I'm going to look for some correlation. And I think that that's the problem when it comes to there are things that people will say to us in a black space that they wouldn't say in a white space or to a white audience. And I find that kind of inconsistency troubling
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
if you can't make your argument anywhere,
Mhm.
any good argument.
Mhm.
If my argument is only valid around black people, it's not a good argument.
That's just fact, man.
My argument has to be valid no matter where I go.
Yep.
And I think that so often we are seeing people who have been tailoring their message to the audience.
Yeah.
Because it's the lowest common denominator. People are not going to be swayed out of identity politics as people think it is. Because when you say identity politics in America, then you have to say, well, what is the largest identity here?
White people.
White people.
They've only voted based on an identity.
So
That's
when
it.
when you say identity politics here, you got to
Mhm.
be careful because ultimately you're talking about a group of people who don't necessarily were not socially conditioned to care about you.
Mm.
If that's to probably be the most succinct way I can put it is that there was no cultural white identity. Oh yeah, yeah.
This
Oh
was
yeah,
written by a white woman, so
yeah. And but that's what I'm saying. But when you start talking about how politics had to come in to support the bigotry,
Mhm.
that's what the Southern strategy was.
Mhm.
The manifesto. They was like, look, after Brown v. Board of Education, they was ready to declare war again. They
Man.
was like 104 senators or congressmen from the South said, hey, bro, we don't support this. We're not in favor of this. And to their detriment, you think about how much further or how much progress what we have made here racially, economically, socially, had there not been such violent opposition
Violent opposition.
to,
Yeah,
st-
man.
to stuff that you wouldn't think is a big deal.
Yeah, and again, we don't again, it's one of those things we don't teach, you know what I'm saying? When we talk about the culture of ignorance, you know what I'm saying, is that we don't teach how oh, excuse me, how violent each generation like like I won't say, but each generation becomes less violent. But the generation prior was just they were just violent, like
Yeah.
just because people just wanted to have the audacity to vote. I implore people all the time, man. I got a conversation with an individual. I was like, man, go look up what men were doing to women when they wanted to vote. They were like beating down women. Like, you just imagine what you were doing to what they were doing to black people getting lynched. There's
Yeah.
plenty of videos out there. I just watched a video where there were older gentlemen talking about how they saw the Confederate flag over in Vietnam. You know what I'm saying? Like that to me, and I tell people all the time, to me, that's a violent act. You know what I'm saying? Because you aren't just flying that flag just because it's cloth. You know what I'm saying? You are flying that flag because you want to be antagonizing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like with the Jason Aldean, thing, the song. You know what I'm saying? And the video and the imagery. It's not that Jason Aldean is saying, "Come try this in a small town." You know what I mean? He wants to be, John Wayne. You know what I'm saying? He wants to be antagonizing. You know what I'm saying?
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, it is really antagonistic, and you know what I mean. And that's how I took a lot of the issues with Florida what's going on in Florida is being really antagonistic and saying, come come try it. Come take my guns. You know what I'm saying? Don't tread on me or something like that. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean?
And these issues, I mean, I think it was Glenn Youngkin,
Mhm.
the governor in Virginia,
In Virginia.
off of the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Off of this, they see this as a winning strategy.
Mhm.
I think it says a lot about us as a country that your winning strategy is to suppress the teaching of the history of the people who've been abused here the most. So that seems to be the political strategy. But when it comes to how does that play out conversationally on an individual level, I don't think it works well.
Mhm.
It doesn't work well because you're going to have to hide behind somebody. Because
Mhm.
the other day DeSantis was trying to hide behind the people who made the standard. Well, I
Oh
didn't
yeah.
make the standard.
I
There,
didn't I didn't I didn't do anything.
yeah, and more importantly, he's out there validating their credentials though. He
Yeah.
said I didn't do this, but they're all academics.
But they're academics.
Like,
They know what
they're
they're talking
scholars.
about. They're
They're
like,
scholars, and I'm like, and let's look at this from both sides though,
mhm.
because if you want civil war in your country, you have to create two ideological differences first.
Mhm.
You have to create that first. Because if we don't have ideological differences that we will kill each other for, then we couldn't have a civil war.
Mhm.
Now, I make the argument that we've created or we've perpetuated the same argument from the Civil War that had not been resolved. We have not resolved the argument, and we've created a situation where now the people who oppose it ideologically now can get with a group of people who now oppose it also. And I think therein lies the challenge when you had this fractional, this George Wallace party of the
Mhm.
60s. We could win three or a couple states in the South, but now you're looking at the appeal. And this is where that article that you posted a few weeks ago about the white Democrat,
Mhm.
the white Republican.
Yeah.
And I tell people what you have to understand is that some of us don't have the luxury or plays out.
Oh, I'm
You know,
sorry, Doc. You broke up there. Go ahead. Go ahead.
but
Go ahead.
no, by saying we're going to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, when you start to go down this road, you're going to get opposition that is not even necessary.
Mhm.
Because whether or not you think this issue is settled or not is not the point. The point is that this issue is being used to create a platform for DeSantis to be president.
Yeah. That's it.
That's what
That's
it's
it.
for.
That's
He's
what.
trying to get a national spotlight, and he knows those early states like Iowa and New Hampshire that this is going to play well. It's
Yeah.
going to play
That,
well. Not
yeah. That to get him recognition, right? Because I think one of the and that's an important point because I think that during the President Trump's in 2016, what people don't know is that Trump did not have to spend a lot of money because he was on TV all the time. They were broadcasting his rallies live. He was on TV all the time. He was on radio and things of that nature. And Ron DeSantis is trying to do the same thing, essentially. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna do these things, so I'm on TV all the time. I don't have to burn through a lot of my cash. Unfortunately, he did burn through a lot of his cash, but at the same time, I think that he understands that that part of American politics is fear, right? Like it is still fear because that's what's passed down. You know what I'm saying? Is fear, right? Like you was talking about with the George Wallace, of the '60s, like those folks didn't go away. They were still living in the '70s and the '80s. Like they
yeah.
didn't just go away. You know what I'm saying? And so they raised their children and grandchildren, and those are the individuals that we're dealing with. If we talk about what happened in Tennessee with those three individuals, the two black guys and the white woman, who were simply just saying like, "Hey, let's protect children." You know what I'm saying? They were like, "Ah, nah, y'all get up out of here with that. Get up out of here." Yeah, and none of that. We don't want that. We don't want none of y'all coming together, right? Populist
Yeah,
movement, right? In the 1880s or so, when the populist movement happened, and there were just black people, black farmers and white farmers, European farmers coming together,
yeah,
just on the basis of economics. You know what I'm saying? Not their differences, and the white folks were like, oh no, heck no, we don't want none of that here. You can't come together. And so they just raised a generation of people. And I say this all the time, man. People always talk about, falsely about black people voting against our own interests. It's a false, man, I'm gonna have a podcast later on that. But white people and the Europeans that come to this country vote against their own interest time and time, over the last 80 years, 80, almost 90, 100 years, you know what I'm saying?
yeah. But
They
then,
voted they voted against their own interests, you know what I'm saying? Time and time again. And part of voting against their own interests is, they want to be, they got main character syndrome. You know what I'm saying? They got main character syndrome. So when you see a Hannah Nicole Jones, right, 1619 Project, you see Ibram Kendi comes out, Dr. Ibram Kendi, sorry. Dr. Ibram Kendi comes out with Stamp from the Beginning, and then Ta-Nehisi Coates, and then you got white authors like Tim Wise and Robin DiAngelo and Jane Elliott. You
yeah,
know what I mean? All of a sudden, these folks are like, whoa, 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 hold on. I'm no longer the main character, you know, in this story. All these supporting characters are now trying to become the main character. You know what I'm saying? You
oh
know,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not, but it's done in a very strategic way,
Hmm.
because I think that what we're seeing happening is that when you make progress either too quickly or too slowly, there are forces that come to essentially to balance it out. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I see here is that, you know, teaching children has always been a revolutionary act.
Hmm.
Teaching children has always been a revolutionary act. And it's so important. One of the charges of Socrates when he was convicted was poisoning the minds of the youth of Athens. That was one of his charges. Poisoning the minds of the youth. And what was he doing? He was questioning things, the art of questioning. He would question things to get the answers. In a society where you're not supposed to question things, when you're supposed to accept things, the questioner is the pariah. The
Hmm.
questioner is the one who is just can't go along and get along. They want to rock the boat. And
Hmm.
and so when we asked a question about, where do we see ourselves? We see ourselves educating still being a revolutionary act. It
Hmm.
is. And so when the turn of the century first started, we were educating a society of workers who could sit in a plant for 8 hours a day
Right.
and push buttons. And that's not what we're doing anymore. But
Right.
the
Exactly.
system has not changed.
Exactly.
And the prison industry being very synonymous to how the school system is set up, to make that seamless transition for a lot of people. And when you start to see that rich people primarily are not going to allow you to take their things from them by voting. They're
Mm-hmm.
not. They didn't get rich by being stupid. They got rich by being, in some instances, co-opting governments or hiding or currying, some of those privileges. Like, we couldn't be initial owners of the Federal Reserve Bank system. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the real money in America. The people who control that printing. Mayor Rothschild said, "Look, I don't care who makes the laws, man. Let me print this money.
Let me print the money, man.
It's
Let me
money."
print the
And,
money.
this is where I think the black conservative is soulless in a sense,
Right. Mm-hmm.
because they've convinced themselves that access to more money will alleviate some of the problems they have with racism here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. It just changes the level of racism you can now receive. It's
Right.
like you have now reached the 33rd level of this issue. And you've been on the third level for a long time, but now you're going up to see this at a fundamental issue. This is the reason why the science has changed to explain phenomenon that they don't have answers for. So, for example, in the 50s, behaviorism was the number one psychology out there. Everybody was the behaviorist, Skinner, and boom, boom. And when they realized that there are things that are happening in human behavior that we cannot attribute to one of the things we've ascribed to behavior, now we have to start looking into the mind.
Right.
Now I have to go from behavioral to cognitive psychology. Now, once I got the cognitive psychology, now I could explain for differences amongst individuals. With behaviorism, I could speak to the group. But now I need to speak to the individual because I could not focus on the group anymore because it's racist to talk about the whole group negatively because you don't know the whole group. So, but cognitively, I can say there's something wrong with your mind. Cognitively, I can say there's something wrong with your development or blah, blah, blah. To whatever, to ameliorate any of the challenges of you counteracting what I say about you. But what we've learned here is that two realities cannot exist or cohabit the same space. Two diametrical realities.
Right.
They can't exist in the same space. And this is why I think you see so much frustration and arguments and debating over issues, because what they're really debating is two different realities.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. It's not compatible.
Yeah. Not to cut you off, dog, but that's one thing I've learned, man, is that, when I'm having a conversation with somebody, one of the things I think about, like, man, are we living in two different realities? Because I think that a lot of people don't understand that, like, man, we see, that's just what it is. We live in two different realities. People don't understand that people live in different Americas, you know what I'm saying? And so this is a lot of the arguments is that, hey, man, we're living in different Americas, man, or different, like you're saying, different realities. What's funny is that people will watch a Marvel, a movie, right? That's fictional, you know what I'm saying, about some characters talking about the multiverse, you know what I'm saying? They'll believe that, but they won't believe that, hey, the reason why that we are disagreeing is because we live in two different realities.
But that's by design, though.
I think we're on the same plane. We just are diverging at some point. You know what I mean?
This is by design. Because if I were to say my number one critique about learning growing up is that no one taught me that I could learn with a framework. I could learn with suspending my ideas until I receive information. But we're only primarily learning through our indoctrination. So we're not taught or how to challenge things early on in the educational process. You're not taught to challenge things because you are perceived to not know the gnosis. You don't have the knowledge to question. You don't have the knowledge to question. Like if I was in an organization and I was on the 13th level and you was on the 10th level, then I'd be like, there's 3 levels of conversations we can't have right now. I'm not saying you're not ready for those conversations. It's just that's not what we talk about on this level. And so when you start talking about the reality, I think at the baseline, we are all very similar. I mean, we want similar things, I think the question then becomes is methodology, practice, how to go from theory to application. And this cannot be done if no one teaches you theory. Theory is what we are taught about how to look at something from a different framework. Because I think that if I put on my if I put on my framework glasses of understanding, if I only wanted to understand, then I wouldn't be concerned about your argument. If I wanted to understand something, I would go to the person who is making the argument that you're making now.
Right.
Like you're not making a new argument. You're making an argument that somebody has made before you. Let's go find out why he made that argument.
Why he made the argument. Right.
And let's see now that even though he made that argument for a different issue than you're using his argument for.
Right.
But you're thinking that it's valid to yours. And I'm saying that's fine. But
we see a lot of people do this with like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X quotes.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like that was a different. Why was he making that argument? Yeah. We see this all the time.
But we don't ask that question.
Yeah.
What it leads us to is it leads us into faulty premises, meaning that we don't necessarily have to accept the world the way you see it. Like I was talking to this one guy. I said, "Listen, man," he said, "socialism comes from Europe, capitalism comes from Europe." He said, "These European centuries." He said, "You can't replace one thing from the place where it came from and expect to get a different result." And as I thought about it, I said, "Wait a minute. Are we gotten to a point where we used to critique things, and the critique be given just as much weight if it can invalidate what you say?"
Right.
Meaning like as I'm a movie critic. I don't know how to shoot a movie, but I can tell you why this one ain't good. Now,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I'm not James Cameron. I ain't got no director, but I can tell you why this is bad.
Yeah.
I can tell you why it's bad. The script is horrible, the cinematography, the act.
Right.
And I think that this is where we've created a system where people can collectively be confused, but individually they can tell you everything's wrong with this thing. It's like, and I'm thinking to myself, like, this has to be the best defense mechanism for any argument, is the idea that it doesn't need to be defended. Because I've never seen people fight to defend truth. Because it's there. Like, what are you gonna do with it?
Yeah, what are you gonna do? Yeah,
what are you gonna do with it? I mean, it's not going anywhere.
Something goes up, it comes down.
and this is where the organizations that have been exposing themselves and the individuals that have been exposing themselves is very interesting, because it doesn't seem that we are connecting alarm or concern with what we're seeing.
Right.
It's almost as if people are preparing in front of you and you're thinking like, "Oh, that ain't for me. That's just something else." It's like, no, bro. Like every cause needs a flag. Every cause needs a song or an anthem. If it's something about a small town, or they're gonna make something.
Yeah.
And that's why that Confederate flag is so powerful to them, because they understand that symbols are not just created like randomly. Symbols are what catches hold with the people. It's not what the people, it's what catches the attention of the masses. And when you start to look at where we're at today, with changing the names of the Confederate bases, not acknowledging that the people who started this country were evil people.
They were terrible people, man. They were just evil. That's just what it was.
That Madison and Jefferson were, Jefferson was a child rapist, and this guy, he was the president. He wrote some good words, but at the same time, it's like when you look up to people who have done things that are dastardly, then you think that, well, they only did those things in the time period because in the time when they did it, it was okay.
It was okay, right? Jefferson enslaved his own sons.
And and and,
He
and
enslaved his own sons. That's great. Like that's great.
but this is what I mean. It's like I have to justify this behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm gonna tell them that Sally Hemings was his lover.
Man.
He wasn't a underage girl he kept in a dungeon and raped if he wanted to. No, that wasn't who she was. And this
Or that the one cook who created macaroni and cheese that black people fix very good, or people just fix anyway. But was his son or no, that was selling him his brother. Sorry,
yeah.
that was selling him his brother. Yeah, man,
And,
and he was half white. They were
yeah.
both they were.
So
Yeah, they were brother. Yeah, they related to Thomas Jefferson's wife.
and this is a problem that a lot of mixed passing people had to go through at that time.
Yeah, buddy.
Passing folks, because Jefferson's kids could pass for white.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that was one of their really redeeming, qualities is that for those who could pass for it, it made no sense to tell people who you were because they would know you were black.
Yeah.
Because they know Jefferson didn't how many kids he had with
yeah,
the legit side.
There's a video of Oprah Winfrey. She brings the black side. It's like three sides. It's one white side and it's two black sides of Thomas Jefferson's family.
Okay.
They bring on it's like an old video, but you can find it on YouTube. Yeah, it was pretty crazy, pretty wild.
Yeah, and so every I think generation we've dealt with some form of this. It's just I think it's interesting where we sit now as where we sat at the last iteration of this. My first iteration was being bused to all white school as a young kid, not really understanding what's going on and why I can't go to the school right next to the house.
Right.
Why I can't bus and ride 45 minutes across town. Because when you're a kid, no one explains to you the simpleness of things. Like they didn't tell you, well, wait a minute, they wasn't going to send those white kids to the black areas. No, they were going to send you to their areas.
Man.
And this is very important to me because I think of it like that we are in the positions now where politically maybe our parents were not at.
Right. Yeah.
They didn't have the acumen or the political power to change anything because in most instances, they were not the ones who were making these decisions for integrating these schools.
Right.
They were not the chargers behind it because most parents didn't want their kids going across town.
Yeah. And that's not what they asked for in Brown v. Board of Education.
Yeah.
Brown v. Board of Education was 4 cases that they just essentially put into one. But essentially, all of those cases was saying that, hey, we just want our kids to go to equal schools. That's it. Like we want buses, we want good schools with heat, and we want the same thing that the white kids got. You know what I'm saying? And then it was the white majority Supreme Court that was just like, you know what? It would. Yeah, I think the solution is to put them in there with white kids.
Yeah, it goes back to this fundamental narrative is that you do not educate anybody that you wish to dominate. I wish to control you. I have no incentive to educate you because educating you is by itself rebellion.
Right.
And I don't think we've seen education like this. The act of educating you is rebellion. Because if you were caught trying to educate a slave, it could be very bad consequences for you. And if you were black, you'd probably been killed. Because they understood something that our system only works if they're ignorant of it. It only works if they're ignorant of it. And in the ignorance, I think what it created was from us was this idea that I have to go to the school board and I have to get involved into the what the school board is talking about, and I need to be aware of what the state legislature is trying to push down the pipe. Because one thing I've noticed is that for those who can, if your kids can be out of a public school, but I think one of the things that I'm seeing happening is that it's like the breeding place. It's like if you want to talk about where you want to have rebellion in the younger people, it starts off with this idea that I graduated from school, but I don't know nothing.
Right. Right.
I want you to be a useful idiot.
Right.
I want you to be ignorant because I don't want you to really know anything about, life.
Economics.
No.
Right. Because we lived through in America where you had people who understood what it meant to be collective, right? When we
Yep.
had when we had strong unions, which created 8-hour work weeks, 40-hour work weeks,
Yep.
weekends, health, what you call an insurance when you get laid off from the job. I can't remember the
Yeah.
name. But we created all these things, you know what I'm saying? And again, you just had a generation that just fought against all that.
Yeah.
Some of them that I won't say some of them, but a good number of them who fought against all of these things, unionization and things of that nature, they benefited from New Deal policies because their parents benefited from New Deal policies. They
Yep.
themselves were nepo babies, and so I think a lot of it is that we're seeing them, not being able to say, well, I heard stories of my great grandpa, getting my dad hired. Now I can't do same thing for my child. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah. And when you go down this path, what you're going to do is you're going to leave out an entire generation of white people in America who were not raised on information like this.
mhm.
Who were not raised on this concept that everything that happened does not have to revolve around whiteness or white people.
Right.
And so now it's an affront to them because they're looking at it like, so what is the significance of why we teach what we teach?
Mhm.
Why what is significant about teaching that Columbus discovered America? Why
Yeah.
is that significant? Because people were here first. Why did Mexico and the America, go to war with each other? What was the reason for that war? Was
Yeah.
was Mexico doing some things in their territory that America didn't like?
Mm.
And so when we start to question critically, one of the things that I see happening is we have to make sure that we understand that the source may not be who we thought it was going to be, because I think in most communities, you look to the people who have been tried and tested, the ones who have survived and thrived, to lack of a better word, in a system that wasn't supposed to. And I think it's easy to marvel at them and say, man, it's impressive.
Mm.
And then it's like, it's impressive, but it's not it's not able to be duplicated.
Mhm.
It's impressive, but I can't transfer it to anything.
Yeah.
It's impressive, but I don't, all I know is, it's like that's not really a roadmap for some people. It's like some people need, like, all right, day 2, all right, don't drop out of school.
Yeah.
Like you get the cliffhangers, but that individual stuff, I think is not I think it's not for the faint of heart, because I think people don't tell you what it requires when you're able to see things from different frameworks, what it does to your mind, like how you're able to do it and then come back.
Mhm.
Because I think this is the opportunity in communications, is to acknowledge that your ideas may be better than my ideas, but your methodology may not be,
Right. Right.
or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And so now what I need to do is I need to say, all right, look, let me tell you why this won't be effective. Or let me tell you why this could be effective and some things you may have missed.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa. And I think that because of a sounding board, we've never really created a forum to do that so we can reach consensus.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can be individual. Like I can have an individual issue or view of an issue, and I can have a collective view of that issue. You know, how does it affect me personally? You know, and how does it affect other people who? Because you know how, like in the Republican world, you know, it ain't an issue until it affects them personally.
Until exactly.
Once it affects you personally, now it's like we got to get legislation.
Yeah, we got to do all these things. Yeah,
and so one of the things that I think that we've done is we drunk a lot of the Kool-Aid. We drunk a lot of the Kool-Aid, man, and I think that we got diabetes, too much sugar in there or something, because I think that some don't see a path ahead, that does not involve status quo.
Yeah,
like they don't like it's like in some way it's like it looks like this, it's going to be like this,
right. In order for and this has been my critique about a lot of, especially a lot of Black people on the right, that they just want to replace, you know what I mean, the system that they think, you know what I'm saying, is successful. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't want to create a something new or something, entirely, centered around ethnicity, right, and culture. They just like, yeah, we see these folks doing it like that, so we're gonna go over here and do it like that. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, and I got a conversation with somebody about marriage and stuff like that, and trying to explain to them that's like a European concept and all this other stuff. They, at the end of the day, they just want to replace it. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, um, yeah.
in when we start to talk about it, man, I think that we see a lot of challenges coming down the pipe. Like I said, AI and boy, but I will tell you that this is an interesting point though, because I've seen a lot, like access to information is not going to be important if you can't synthesize it. And I think that's what AI is doing. It's synthesizing data now. It's synthesizing it so that, like, like we all have different processes to form conclusions. Before I say I'm certain about something, there's a metric, there's some methodology to a certainty, even if it's just the best guess. And when it comes to what we've been teaching and how does it work, I think it becomes that we're in an experimental phase. Like we have to experiment, and the last people you want to experiment with is children, because if the adults don't know, then the kids gonna be ignorant,
man.
And when you want to talk about ignorance in a cultural thing, I think we got to start with this idea that one of the reasons why we teach a culture of respecting our elders is because a lot of times the elders didn't know anything.
Right.
Trying to respect to them, to not question or challenge them. You wasn't supposed to bring up something that could make them look bad.
Right. Especially if they could do anything like not read or anything.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Not understand, not know how to put, bank accounts, and you want to embarrass them.
But if it's a cantankerous, old dude that's just stubborn, set in his ways, let's go. Let's go, bro. Because one of the things I would tell people, I said, listen, man, I said, how do you know that your ideas is valid? I said, because they outlive you.
Mm-hmm.
I said, think of it this way. Who is going to be advocating your point of view when you ain't doing it no more?
Mm-hmm.
Like who is going to be the one that's making arguments that need to be addressed to people making counter arguments? Because when you start to get into this perspective, we're not convincing people anymore with arguments anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're beyond that phase.
Yeah.
That phase is gone. We're now in the phase of discrimination, of this being discriminatory, because we understand that there are some who know how to say all the right stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They know how to shuck and jive, and they know how to kiss the babies, and
yeah, man.
you know, when they need a black face on a policy, they know who to come get.
Come get me.
They know where to get, and then they know that
Kente kneeling in the Kente claw.
bro. And it's like we get why.
Mm-hmm.
We get why you understand the idea that conservation is important here, because if you think of it as the conservative playing the long strategy, right? Because I like to try to think like the people who I disagree with.
Yeah.
Because I want to understand, like, where does this logically go? Like, if I take what you're saying to its logical conclusion, what am I going to be left with?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I don't think they do that.
Yeah.
They don't take it to its logical conclusion, and they'll just take you to a half-baked premise. And what I like to do is I say that we need to know how did they operate this mentality, or why was it so powerful to us, and when what it created for us. Because I think what it created in us and for us was this idea that we have to essentially forsake everything they're telling everybody else about how to make it here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because who else came with the group baggage? The group baggage, or I have to now be the exceptional Negro.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I am now the one who is he made it out of the ghetto, or
Yeah, like Tim Scott like to say, talk about cotton to Congress.
It's like, man.
Like, man, why you riding on your grandparents' coattails, man? You ain't making out no cotton to Congress. Come on, man. What did you talk about?
But once again, they know how to say the right stuff, because even on the Democratic side, the argument is you will not be a centrist mainstream Democrat with an elected political position in a predominantly large area if you don't have the ability to know what your role is.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Like every now and again you can have a few what's the lady in St. Louis?
You're talking about Cori Bush.
Yeah. Like you can have a few of those. You can have a few people in there that's gonna be like here to rock the boat, they're gonna call it out what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna call it what it is.
She knows she's safe. She's like, yeah, I'm good. It's like Ilhan Omar, and where she's at. She's like, yeah, I'm safe. Look, I can say whatever I want, because it's gonna be, I'm Somali. I live in a Somali area where there's Somalis that believe what I believe, and I can say whatever it is I want to say. You know what I'm saying? Because they believe the same thing I believe. So,
And when you go down this path, you'll see that. But we can only have so many of this type of individual. Like we can't have all these people coming to rock the boat simultaneously, because we have to keep them content enough from pushing it over.
And Michael still learned that. He learned that quick.
Yeah.
He cannot. He tried to get Republicans to be like, look, this is how y'all need to approach black folk. And they were like, no, we ain't gonna do that. We're gonna go over here and talk to Tim Scott.
No, and for what it's worth, though, I would say that, you know, it's I think it's a lack of historical understanding. You know, there's a reason that there was more black people serving in Congress in the 1870s than there were in the 1970s. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like, if you think about it, why was there more black people in the 1870s than the 1970s?
yeah. It's because they weren't concerned about policy. They were, I mean, party. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They were just concerned about ideology, right? They were like, look, we just here to serve black people. That's what we here to, serve. And then
Yeah, but even when you start to look at when it came down to policy, or when it came to us, we had no policy advocates. We had no voice, right? Because the people who spoke for us usually were the moderate. What they realized that they got all they were going to get.
yeah,
I think that's when it hit them. It's like, we're not going to get any more than what we're getting now, and since we're not going to get any more now we have to find a way that can create a continued need for us. Because the last thing I would want to do is create a desire for people to think they don't need me. And when it comes to that policy, whether it be Democratic Party, because I think that if you want to look at this country and you say, for black people, I would say that if Trump was elected again, I think the issue that you're going to see for most black people is that it will create more solidarity among black people than anything else.
Yeah.
It'll definitely create a solidarity. However, will it be actualized or how will it be marketed? It's hard to say, because I think that you're going to look at an individual who can't speak to you while you're hurting.
Right.
And I think that to me has been one of the central things about when Obama was president, when he said, when Trayvon was killed, and he said, this could be my son. And I think for an American president to say this could have been somebody who looked like me is something that we've never really conceptualized here. And when it comes to that social learning, or that realizing that racism is no longer in my interest. It's hurting me. It's hurting the country. But more importantly, it's ignorance on both sides. Those who feel like they don't know how to tackle or address the issues that were created before them, primarily by their parents, grandparents, before they were born, feeling like I may have inherited this, but I don't want it anymore. So what do I do with it now that I don't want it anymore?
Yeah.
And they have not given any alternatives yet. They haven't said, hey, look, you might have to just go back to your Polish roots.
Man, I say that all the time, man. Like, there's no alternatives, man. There just simply is not. I would say that there never has been. There never, if you watch if you go back and you read and understand how black people moved, you know what I'm saying, or ideology, right? Their ideology, you know what I'm saying. I remember reading a letter from when W.E. Du Bois wrote Woodrow Wilson, and basically said, like, hey, Woodrow Wilson, look, I got all these black men to vote for you. If you don't look out for us, look, we ain't gonna vote for you again. And you know what I'm saying? And Woodrow Wilson turned out to be one of our most racist presidents. You know what I'm saying? And W.B. Du Bois afterwards regretted that. You know what I'm saying? Because again, Woodrow Wilson was approaching it like, look, man, look, we don't have too many choices. You know what I mean? This is it. This is it. It's either you or this racist over here, Theodore Roosevelt, or this real racist that we know. We don't know who you are. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
again, you know, one of those things. I would love to have you back, Dr. Ham, to talk about, you know, black ideology. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Across ideological spectrums, to get people to get people to understand that, you know what I mean, that black people, we move based on thought, not you know, this idea of taking, or what's being taken from us. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Collective consciousness. This is why the church is so a big part of the black community,
Hmm.
because it allows a corporateness to
Hmm.
happen in the community that you don't see anywhere else.
Absolutely.
You know, with praising, everybody singing, everybody's collectively changing or charging the atmosphere. And when you start to talk about atmospheres, this is where you're seeing the biggest battles happening at in this country. The battles are not happening at the ground level.
Hmm.
The battles are happening at the top of these levels, at the principality level. You know, at the level of we're not talking about your neighborhood community school board. You know, they either doing the state school board. They're talking about the national certifications, Department of Education, because the questions that we are really asking ourselves now are questions that should have been asked 70 years ago. Seriously,
Yeah.
everything that we're discussing right now should have
Yeah.
been discussed 70 years ago.
Yeah.
70
Absolutely.
years ago.
Absolutely.
And in that 70-year time frame, all we've done is create arguments to prolong why it hasn't happened.
Hmm. Hmm.
All we've
Hmm.
done, because nobody's really said, hey, all those dudes that were studying academic racism, all those scientists and philosophers and all those dudes,
Hold,
Young,
hold
all
on.
those guys.
Repeat that for the folks in the back
What?
about academic racism.
Yeah, like because they've done nothing to say this was wrong. They've done nothing to. I mean, they may have published a one sentence in a journal somewhere that said that we don't support this findings, but they have not made a conscientious, concerted effort to first identify why it was necessary to create these ideas.
Hmm.
It wasn't that you was just inferior because they thought that you were inferior. No, you had to be inferior so they could sleep good at night, because
Yeah.
because they were not abusing a human being, they were abusing an animal. And once you understand that that was why it was created, then you'll understand why it is perpetuated. And when you get to this mentality of I'm not I'm not trying to put on all these lenses for the sake of identifying something,
Mm.
because we've already identified it. You're putting on the lenses for the dismantling.
Mm.
It's to dismantle it. But the beauty is if you dismantle it like it was built, they won't know.
Hmm.
This is the beauty of it. If
Hmm.
you dismantle it like it was built, they won't even know. And very few have the skill to do that because they don't know what they're up against.
Mm.
Because when you know, like, if you don't know who you're up against, if you don't know your opponent, then you're a coin flip.
That's exactly.
You're a coin flip. And not only do we know them, we understand what triggers them. We understand that it wasn't just blacks, it was black with progress. Is
Mm.
if you were a black, what do they call if you was a good old black person, or you wasn't the uppity, called
Uppity. Yeah, that was they called.
yeah,
Yeah. Uppity.
it was you was a black person that was just like didn't know your station, you know, didn't know your position. You were the one, you were the problem, you were the uppity one.
Hmm.
And when you were uppity in a society that encouraged you to be humble, you came off as grandiose. It
Right.
came off as Muhammad Ali with
Right.
hyperbole. I'm so fast. I'm so beautiful. I'm so quick. And you're like, well, I can hit the light switch and be in the bed before the room get dark. You're like, what? Like, why is that important? He says this thing. It's
Right.
important because this is how you affirm yourself. This is how
Right.
you esteem yourself. And we've had to do it so dramatically or drastically because the opposite has been there. And when you start to think about, you know, how we are viewing things now, I think the beauty is that we can look at it from two different lenses. I understand the national security argument for racism. I really do. I
Mm-hmm.
understand the argument of why it was important for national security. I also understand that this wasn't told to the average citizen.
Mm-hmm.
The average citizen wasn't told this.
Mm-hmm.
They wasn't told, hey, stop being racist because we're losing international, assets.
Yeah.
Nobody was told that. They
No,
they weren't
not
told
at
that.
all. Not-
All that was told to them, was that they should be allowed to eat where you eat at because they're humans now.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
They weren't taught about China and Russia. You know what I mean? Like printing newspapers. Like what the heck is America saying? Why are they
well, and this is the punctuated equilibrium theory framework that I use is for studying why things don't change.
Yeah.
Essentially, you create organizations whose only function is not to change. That's what
Mm-hmm.
you mean. Like so, and then you have other organizations whose job is to help you not change.
Mm-hmm.
So I have my union that doesn't want any reform, and they're saying reform or we're going to strike, and they're like, okay, wait a minute. What we're seeing happening is that when it comes to power, the people who have the most power tend to act first.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's because of paranoia, if it's because they feel that because they have the power, they should attack when they do, but it's always the people with the power that are showing you their hand first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when this happens, what we have not seen here is we've not seen, and ever since the 60s with the Kerner Commission, what they've done is there were so many social unrest in this country in the 60s that we never heard anything about.
Right.
There was no stories about. There was no newspaper article about it. And that was by design. And when I started to see that they created these narratives that it was our frustrations with the system that was causing the problems, and then they realized when we started to get into this mentality of combating it through how they built it, then they were like, okay, we can only slow them down. We can't stop them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what they're saying today is like the things they did to slow us down are no longer stopping us anymore. Like I can't use my GI Bill for higher education. Okay,
Right.
now let's move it. Or I can't move into that area. My check cleared. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing now is I would say the final really step of integration is not of the final step of integration for some is to not be needy on the out group anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
like when I don't need anything from the out group, then I can now be fully integrated into the in group.
Mm.
And the reason that a lot of Black conservatives cannot be fully integrated into the in group is because they still need the out group.
They still need, yeah, exactly. They still need
They
the
do.
they just need the affirmation from the out group,
Yes.
right? That's what they need, right? You know what I mean? This is why.
Once they get that, because once they get that, they can now take that to
Mhm.
the and now they can report back because they're a trusted agent now. And so
Yeah, buddy.
and so when you get past assimilationist, then you start to see that I'm not here to assimilate only as I want to on my own demand,
Mhm.
assimilate because it's in my interest to do so, not because it's in your interest for me to do it. And when you started to see this happening, one of the things that never really integrated, apart from like, churches, a lot of the areas that were predominantly white that were poor, who could not afford to leave the area. So,
Mhm.
so you can really make an argument that if you were white in this country and your parents were anywhere near affluent, you didn't have to be around black people.
I mean, that's just that's why the middle of the country looks the way it does.
Yeah, I mean, you have to
Right.
be. And
Mm,
nobody is saying that you should have been around black people growing up or should not have been. All they're saying is that that's just how it was.
mhm.
And for so many people in America, that is the way it is.
Yeah.
That you have 75% of white people who don't even know a black person.
Mhm, mhm.
I mean, and you're like, wow. But when you look, like I said, to your point, when you look at how our country is split up, it's like, shoot, you take the black population out of the top, 10, 15 cities, we maybe 1-2%. And
Right.
that's being modest. But I don't think that the idea of politics today has become something that is for redemption purposes. Like
Mhm.
it's not coming this way. It's coming from a place where it's hard to see um the interests converge quickly enough uh for the type of progress that we've never even addressed. Like, and I think that is the most important part of this, is that if I don't even acknowledge there was an injury done to you,
Mhm. Mhm.
then I am not going to be looking to any solutions to heal you from anything.
Right.
Nor
Right.
will I even feel necessary to do so, because it's your responsibility
Mm.
to pull yourself up from the bootstraps,
Bootstraps.
even though they took your straps from you.
Right, right.
And
This what the Florida of education is saying is like, well, I mean, they learned some skills, so they should have just pulled themselves up without
and
acknowledging the system that was in
yes,
place. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
and they didn't talk about how during in 1865, 1866, that the first laws that Virginia passed were vagrancy laws.
Yeah,
Like, the dudes had nowhere to go, and the first thing you did was make it illegal to have nowhere to go.
yeah.
That ain't compassion. That's evil. That's like me burning your house down and then saying you can't stay at the shelter because you didn't have fire insurance. I'm like, what? Right?
Or the past laws where if there were boys hanging three or more together,
Yeah,
well,
loitering.
loitering, they could be arrested. It's in
There
the
were there were no trespass signs in this country before 1865.
right.
Trespassing only really was started because the idea that enslaved people who were free would just come and take some of your stuff
Mhm.
because it was free game. Because you
Yeah.
didn't own the trees. But this is important for us, because when you start to look at how history is repeating itself, I mean, it's really so weird now. It's like this is the same continuation of the same argument, and they want people to think these are new arguments.
Mhm.
Like,
Right. Exactly.
if this is you think that it's under debate now, the people who are wondering what they should teach your children,
Mhm.
because they ain't debating what they should teach their children.
Mhm. Mhm.
Ain't nobody having a debate of what you should teach white children about this country. The status quo is good.
Right.
That's to James Elliott point. She said, "Look, if you grew up here and you're not racist, then you weren't paying attention." Yeah, you weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
You invented everything. You made everything. Everything that was notable. Everything was written. Everything music. Like you made civilization. And now it's like, you mean somebody else was here too?
Mhm.
And I think that's something that we're going to continue to go through until we get to a point when we realize that, hey, all you're doing is poorly supplementing the teaching of the history to my child. And
Mhm.
as a parent, I will have to come in and supplement and give them the correct story.
And the correct story. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember story time. I gotta remember to say story time when I'm saying anecdotal stuff. You know what I'm saying? But story time. You know what I mean? And I heard my brother do this. You know what I mean? It's like story time.
Story.
So I'm gonna start doing that. But anyway, I remember my daughter. She brought home some homework about Christopher Columbus, and she was like, "Oh, Christopher." The homework was like, "Oh, Christopher Columbus wanted to discover whether the Earth was flat." I was like, "Sweetie, people knew the earth was not flat. People knew the earth was round." They didn't know.
Yeah.
They were afraid to just go further than the land that they could see. Like that was it. And you know, and further talking about like a lot of what Christopher Columbus learned was from African peoples who
Yep.
said that, hey, look, we done went all the way over there. There's people over there, and we can't, and some of us made it back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, because people don't teach that Mansa Musa gets his wealth because I can't remember the other. There was I can't remember who was before Mansa Musa, but his name was Mansa something. He left. He took a crew, left, and never came back. And so Mansa Musa inherited his wealth. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so yeah, so people don't teach it that. But anyway,
But this is what James Baldwin talked about in his speech what he did against William Buckley. And he
ooh,
talked.
I love watching that, boy.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
James Baldwin, give that man
But
the
when he did,
Mhm.
he talked about how the only the real reason that Black people made progress here is because of Africa.
Yeah.
Africa had to be taken seriously now after the Second World War. They had to be taken seriously. And as a direct result of them being taken seriously, it was like, well, wait a minute, we have to start now changing the narrative that we have been teaching. Social learning and overt teaching. And I think that this way happens in the reverse order. So it's social learning happening now. Like social learning is knowing you can't go out, you can't be carrying 24/7 anymore.
Yeah.
There was a time when you could just be carrying anytime you wanted to be. Now there's consequences for that. And that had to be learned socially. Nobody developed. There was not a Black think tank, and everybody sat around and said, "Let's call these chicks Karens." You know, it happened organically, and this is how most social change tends to take place. It happens socially, and when it happens socially, then the school system or the academic system has to catch up to the phenomenon and then study it and say, well, wait a minute, why is there social change happening on this particular issue? Because we have now moved the window. That the Overton window has been moved now, so that we're bringing things that we're bringing fringe things now into the mainstream conversation. And one of those fringe things has been this idea that we've never wrestled with issues of historical significance, which is why we're still battling with them today.
Yeah.
And we don't really talk about that. Like this issue is because we have not dealt with how to address the descendants of enslaved Americans.
Right.
We don't have a forum for that. There's no curriculum, there's no training plan, and people I'm like, who gonna teach the teachers?
That's
about the students. Who gonna teach the teachers?
Yeah, that's true.
Because most of these teachers that our age older, they were indoctrinated into a system where they did not see a problem with only talking about whiteness and white people and white things.
Right. And more importantly, it was white males. You know what I'm saying? A patriarchal system. You know what I'm saying? White males.
But
white.
Even,
you know what I'm saying?
It's just, you go to females. One of the earliest things that white women could own was enslaved people.
It was enslaved people. Yeah, they were
own property, but several people.
Yeah.
Because
that's how George Washington inherited enslaved people. He inherited these slave people from his wife. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and this was I was reading a book. It's called "They Were Her Property."
Oh yeah.
They were her property.
Yeah,
and because most people don't know about the stories about what women would do to enslaved men, because when you start to get into this idea of law becomes the last ditch effort to preserve a system. So like prior to the Civil War, they were starting to pass these laws, Fugitive Slave Act, They were starting to pass compromises about, Virginia and territorial disputes, and they realized that as America grew, we're going to have more free states and slave states.
Yeah.
And then they thought, well, wait a minute. If they come take our power from us, we did not just develop a wage system here. We developed a social system also.
Right.
And even though you might replace our wage system, you are not going to replace our social system.
Right.
Nor can law do that, because law usually doesn't change social policy, because the lawmakers usually want to keep the social policy the way it is. Because ultimately, if you want to see crime go down among any particular group, all you got to do is stop reporting crime on that group.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. You stop reporting crime.
I stop reporting crime on the group. And so if I want to make a group look more criminal, I'll just report more crime on that group.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with somebody about that, again, story time. But saying that, a lot of police departments don't report, a lot of police departments in predominantly white areas don't report the crimes that happen. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the police departments in predominantly black areas do report the crimes that get committed, you know what I'm saying, up to the FBI.
There's usually money, grant funds associated with that. But it's the same thing in Connecticut. You saw the story, the Connecticut police were accused of like racial biases in policing, right? So they found out that the police in Connecticut were writing thousands of tickets to white drivers who had committed no offense, for the purpose of making the numbers not look so lopsided with the black drivers. I know. And so you're like, man, like the level of sophistication that they want to go to hide their bigotry is, I'm gonna do extra work by putting in these false tickets to make it look like I'm giving white drivers, even though I'm out here targeting black people.
Yeah.
And so you go and say, man, like what else they got to show you? What else they got to do? Like, I mean, what other study do you need? And when I start to look at this, I say that, the unfortunate part is that we haven't learned anything. To about ignorance, like we haven't really learned a collective learning, because we've been educated by people who benefit from our ignorance. And that's, I think, if you had to boil it down to its common denominator, we are educated by people who have an incentive for us to be ignorant. So if you have an incentive for me to be ignorant, then you have no incentive to educate me.
Right.
And when I say incentive is because, one, I ain't got to feel bad about what my grandparents and great grandparents did to yours. And I think that there's just this misnomer that, my people didn't own any slaves. That I'm like, wait, you're right. They may have not owned anyone, but they benefited from the system,
right,
directly or indirectly.
Right? Yeah.
You benefited from it, and it's hard for people to explain, or for you to explain to them how they benefited from the system when they think that the system was beneficial for you.
Yeah.
Like you think this was good for me. And so now you don't even understand why I think it wouldn't be. And you
I'm sorry, Doc, but one of those bigoted tropes was Irish people being police officers. Yeah. Well, the trope, the thing was that that they were hiring, the nepotism, right?
Yep.
That's what was happening, and also racism, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, we had a system set up at the time where, police, black people police black people, indigenous
Primarily.
people,
Yep.
yeah, policed indigenous people, but at the same time, it created this idea that, these Europeans that came to these countries, who were hired government jobs, and that's the facts of the matter.
Yeah, even that trope. Some of that is recent data, because
Yeah,
let's look at New Orleans as a good example. New Orleans is a city that during Reconstruction there were more black police officers in New Orleans in like the 1880s than there was in the 1930s.
yeah, man.
Because there was a period when New Orleans would not hire any black police officers.
Anybody? Yeah,
They
exactly.
wouldn't hire any of them.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so when
Exactly.
you say that black people are policed by black people, this was kind of a de facto policing, meaning like, yeah, we were in our areas kind of like not paid policing.
Right,
Essentially.
right.
But,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
but when it started to become integration,
Mhm.
the biggest thing they learned is, first off, okay, black people don't arrest a white person.
Yep.
Here, you can't have a gun. You
Yep.
can't get dressed in this building with us. You gotta go across the street. And then they're like, wait a minute. So you mean to tell me if I see a white man breaking the law, I'm supposed to just keep it moving? Yes.
Yeah.
And what does that send to the individual breaking the law?
Uh-huh.
Can't you shit to me? And I think that has been the, I would say, greatest benefit to white people in this country has been the relationship that they have had with the police.
Mm.
Because I think it's the one area where we can measure, I mean, apart from economic issues, economic issues standing alone, but I mean, these are the issues that we can measure on an individual, on a group basis, and we can ultimately get a consensus among most people that there is a discrepancy, or that there is not equal treatment with policing. I don't
Right.
think that issue is contentious. Maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it would have been contentious, which I don't think it is today, because we're seeing too much evidence, or too much evidence to support the difference than we are seeing, to be exculpatory evidence for them saying, hey, we're treating everybody the same. And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like, I saw y'all just put that dog on that dude with his hands up in Ohio.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I can see you, right? And
Yeah.
I think that is the I think the most weird part. It's like you would think that because there's so much scrutiny that it would be getting better.
Mm.
But it's actually not. And I'm thinking to myself, like, they know they're the only meal in town.
Mhm.
Like, if I know I'm the only meal in town, you got to come eat this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to public safety, because they have a monopoly on it, we tend to think of it like, and I tell them all the time, it's like, it's for you or for you. And when I see people today, I'd say that it's almost hard to try to point out one specific issue,
Mhm.
except for the idea that I know if there were no black people here, you would not feel comfortable with the police doing this.
Mm.
You know why? Because they don't feel comfortable with it in Europe. The only place they feel comfortable with you here is with me here.
Mhm.
And I'm just saying, like, maybe that's gonna come back to bite you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because I think a lot of these issues that we're seeing today need investigation, and more importantly, they need to be understood from the perspective of, I don't care what lens you put on, whether it's justice or equality, whatever. My concern is that either the ones that you got aren't working anymore, from the flip side,
Mhm.
because I want you to make a better argument. That this is my thing. I want you to make a better argument, and I want you to help me make a better argument. But we can only do that if I'm going to allow you to tell me where it's weak argument at.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I talk to my black conservative brethren,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they're disingenuous. Like, I think some of them mean what they say. Like, I think that they're heartfelt, indoctrinated. I don't know, you know what I mean? But they come across sincere.
Right.
Whether or not it's valid is not my really point, because I don't want to make it seem like your arguments aren't rational if just because they're not actionable.
Mm-hmm.
Because you might think that your solutions are legit, and they might be, but you can't draw out a formula on paper. You know, like there's no roadmap. If I were to take your thinking and just apply it, how does that affect the group or the masses of us? And for most people, I would say it doesn't. It affects you, few your friends. Like, oh yeah, it's like insider trading to me almost. I got a good stock tip. Let me tell my homeboy down the street, hey, go get it on the stock. And I think that for most of the time, that's what people are thinking about privilege. They're thinking it's something I just give you, and they're not thinking about it is what I don't have to deal with.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
What I don't have to go through, and more importantly, what I can expect to go through or encounter. Because most people aren't seeing the police and thinking this could be it. You know?
Yeah, no, that's
this
true.
This could be it. And
yeah.
and hopefully he having a good day.
That's true, man. That's true. Well, you've been dropping fire as usual. You know what I'm saying? And so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up, this podcast, man. Appreciate you, Doc, as always, man.
Always a pleasure, sir.
Dropping gems, dog. You know what I'm saying? For the folks that tune in, man, we appreciate y'all, man. Go out there and like and share, man. Man, find Dr. Kabir, man. He's always dropping something. You know what I mean? When he chooses to interact with social media, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Be looking for this podcast coming out on this conversation to be coming out on Monday morning or Tuesday, man. I might be on CP time. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, man, I want to give out last words. My last words is going to be, you know what I mean? I'm going to be purchasing this book, Lies About Black People: How to Combat Racist Stereotypes and Why It Matters, by I always mess this dude name, Dr. Omakongo Dabinga, and Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. The person that my brother shared that, and I was like, God dang! I said I wasn't gonna buy another book,
bro.
I'm like, man, I wasn't gonna buy another book, but God, I gotta collect them all. They're like Pokemons, man. I gotta collect them all because at the end of the day, like our conversation is, we are living in a culture of ignorance, and the only way not to be ignorant is or the only way to shield yourself from that is to be open, to dialogue, particularly about race. As you say, if you join this conversation with me and Doc, man, we're not afraid to talk about race. I wish that other groups and racial groups weren't, particularly white people weren't afraid to talk about race. You know what I mean? Because it's not something scary to run away from. Is we're learning. You know what I'm saying? So with that, man, Doc, I'm gonna give you last words, man. What you got, Doc?
Oh no, man. To your point, man, you're right. We're learning, man, and I think that, but more importantly than learning is we are building off of what we have learned onto what those who've come before us have learned. And I think that so often we look at learning as isolated activity, but it's collective consciousness. And what we're learning is that we we wrestle with ideas that need to be wrestled with, and we throw the other ones that don't need to be into the dustbin of history. And I think that the really good ideas have lasted this long for a good reason. Is because there's validity in them. And I think when we start to look at knowledge, what we're trying to do as quickly as possible is how to vet knowledge from noise. Because so often I think that we can spend a lot of time on the noise and miss the knowledge.
Yeah.
So I think that that's my focus has been really trying to get to the knowledge away from the noise. And I think to do that requires a sensitivity that some people don't know how to use in truth with firm, because just because I'm telling you the truth don't mean I got to be an ass,
Right.
And I think that when it comes to delivering of the message, I think that has always been a challenge for us, because without trying to sound alarmist to people, without trying to be, doomsday apocalypse, I like to think that the ideas that hope has a function in our discussions, because when you stop hoping for change or things to be better, I think King talked about you find yourself in that pit really quickly of thought, where energies are not being constructed. So I think that's what I encourage people, man, is that making sure that we're learning, but more importantly, we're building, because it's going to be the building that we're going to have to rely on when the learning stops.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you, Doc.
Pleasure,
always, man. With this Yah'm Saying podcast, we out, man.
We out.
Out.